Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Steve Donovan, the Director of Alumni Relations at Trinity College. Thank you for coming inside on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, at least here in the northern half of New England, where I sit and a few of us sit. While it's not nearly the same as all being together on the quad this weekend, it is similar, I suppose, and that this is always the part of an in-person reunion Saturday afternoon when you have to make the difficult decision to come inside from wonderful conversations and frisbee tossing on the lawn, often with a cold beverage in hand, to take part in a wonderful panel presentation with your talented and accomplished classmates. And we're glad you've chosen to come inside with us. And while we so wish we could be doing this on the beautiful quad and in beloved classrooms along the long walk, the world is just not quite ready for that. I promise you, we are very eager to bring alumni together again in person, both on campus and throughout the world. And it's our hope that that will begin this fall. Today, we're pleased that you've joined us virtually and hope you have and will find the weekend's array of class-specific gatherings and college-offered presentations celebrating accomplished alumni enjoyable, informative, and inspirational. Now to today's program. The world of college admissions was already a changing landscape prior to the pandemic, and that certainly has not lessened in the last 15 months. We're fortunate to have tremendous expertise and experience among the admissions team here at Trinity, and certainly a bevy of it throughout our alumni body as well, some of whom are celebrating their own reunions this year. We're excited to have assembled a team of experts who will share their perspectives and answer your questions today. It's my pleasure to turn the program over to Adrienne Odie, Trinity's Dean of Admission. Adrienne came to Trinity in 2019 from Berry College in Georgia, where she served as the Director of Admissions. She's also served in admissions at Kenyon College, her alma mater, and the University of Rochester. She's widely regarded as an ethical leader with a deep passion for all aspects of this work and has served in several leadership roles with national enrollment organizations. Adrienne earned her bachelor's degree in mathematics from Kenyon College and a master's degree in educational policy with a focus on quantitative research and evaluation from The Ohio State University. An NCAA All-American swimmer at Kenyon College, which, as some of you are likely aware, is a powerhouse of Division III swimming and diving, Adrienne has developed a lifelong passion for working with scholar athletes, holding numerous athletic liaison positions throughout her career, and serving as a swim coach in her spare time. She's been a tremendous addition to Trinity and a wonderful colleague. And I'd just like to say thank you, Adrienne, and turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Steve, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm hopeful that this will be our last virtual reunion. Being at Trinity just since 2019, I've only experienced the virtual reunion, and so I'm really excited about the world opening up, hopefully, and for everybody's continued health and well-being as we move forward. As Steve said, I'm the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid here at Trinity, and what a year we have had. Issues in college admissions over the last few years have certainly captured the attention of students and families, as well as the media from all over the world. From some schools seeing double the amount of applications they saw last year to others who have experienced major declines in enrollment. We've seen all of it and a lot of change this year. I embarked upon my career in higher education in the throes of the 2008 recession. So I haven't really known a time in higher ed that wasn't filled with twists and turns and shifting gears, especially since beginning at Kenyon, a similarly tuition-dependent institution committed to opening its doors to more and different students and to providing an extraordinary experience to those students. The challenges we face as we seek to include these different voices and views while making sure we have the resources, fiscal, social, and otherwise, are real and widespread. As you heard from Steve, from Kenyon, I went to the University of Rochester, a tier 1 research university with a global reputation, and the operation there, while much larger, the goals were still the same. Find amazing students from all over the world, invite them here to our community where we commit to providing them an exceptional experience and preparing them to make the world even better than it is right now. After Rochester, going to Berry College in Rome, Georgia was the first time I experienced working for an institution that said yes to students who applied far more than it said no. As a regional comprehensive university, the demographic of students served was majority low and middle income students, given the school's founding to serve students from the area who had no access to higher education. It was there that the socioeconomic diversity of the pool opened my eyes to the differences and opportunities students have from place to place and school to school. I've started my career with paper applications and no GPSs. And in this moment where we have to think about TikTok and Snapchat and the many channels where students are and building communities and working both in institutions where we have the luxury and the privilege to curate a community that prepares students to enter an increasingly globalized world. And the other half of my career at an institution that by design was to serve really different students and by circumstance said yes to students for whom a door may be closed. And now, as we continue to move through both a global health pandemic and a pandemic of racism, I am reminded that we are here to build community within, around, and through our respective institutions and communities. There are many, many people all around the world whose lives have been and continue to be rocked by the pandemics we're experiencing. It has pushed me and pushed us to think differently as we actively engage students and families in this process. Our panelists today are united by their Trinity experiences and rooted here in Hartford, while also sitting in different seats across higher education. I'm excited about the conversation we will have today, and we'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves, and then we will delve into questions that are on your mind. So to make things go as smoothly as they can, mostly for me, I'm asking folks to put their questions in the Q&A so I can keep us organized and we can address the issues that are inspired by what you're seeing in the media and experiencing in your communities here. So up next, we have Lee Coffin, Trinity class of 1985, and currently Vice Provost and Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Dartmouth College.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Adrian. And it's nice to be back, even virtually at Trinity after a career that started there. I worked in the alumni office for 4 years right after I graduated. And then by way of introduction, I've been an admission officer for 31 years. I started in the summer of 1990 at Connecticut College as an assistant director. Was promoted to dean in 1995 there and have been a dean ever since. So 31 overall and 26 as a dean is a tenure that, to Adrian's point about things keep churning and twisting, and it's not just since 2008. I don't think there's been 2 back-to-back admission cycles over those 31 that have been identical to one another. And that's partly what I have found really interesting in the work. It invites creativity. You have to be current on the landscape as it twists and shifts. And my fellow panelist, Newman Selvitelli, was a senior at Trinity in 91 when I started my journey. So I was at Con for 11 years. I left college admission and went to Milton Academy for a couple of years as their dean of enrollment, and jumped back after just 2 years to Tufts, where I was dean of undergraduate admissions for 13 years, and really loved being a jumbo, and wasn't looking to go anywhere else until Dartmouth rang my doorbell in the fall of 2015 and said, we would like to have a conversation with you about the vice provost role, and here I've been in Hanover ever since. So my career, has broadly mostly been in NESCAC, Trinity, Con, and Tufts. Little taste of the Ivies, which has been eye-opening in ways that I'm happy to talk about. But the trends I've seen over this 31-year journey, Adrian has put her finger on a bunch of them. If you graduate from college in 2000 or before, the landscape is really different. The volume has gone up exponentially, and it's not just volume from all the usual places. It's a more global pool than it was at the beginning of my career, and certainly when I was in college. The pool is shifting away from New England in the mid-Atlantic. So just use Dartmouth as an example. 55% of our class this fall comes from the South, the West, or overseas. And that's a record high for Dartmouth. And it speaks to the demographic shifts away from New England and our traditional visibility and into places like Texas and Arizona and Nevada and Colorado, where you have a growing pool of students, but also families who are new to the United States, students who are first in their families to be applying to college. The idea of a residential liberal arts college in New England seems kind of foreign when they're thinking about UT or the University of Florida or Berkeley. And then you add price onto it, it gets even more eye-popping. But that trend of geographic shift also parallels a shift in access. And I think the trend I've most been struck by over my time as an admission officer is the conversation we have about opening the doors to places like Trinity to students from families and schools that don't historically look to the quad and the Long Walk as their home. And that's exciting. And 10 years ago, few of us were talking about first generation college-bound college access. I was the first in my family to go to college. And when I arrived at Trinity in the fall of '81, I didn't really recognize that as a point of difference. I just showed up and unpacked and made my way. But that cohort is now a really important one for all of our peer schools as we look to students for whom college is going to be the beginning of a shift in their family story. Financial aid, huge part of that. Racial, ethnic, gender identity, low income access, all significant initiatives that are on all of our plates. And I think as we come out of the pandemic, I think the big questions for all of us are going to be what happens to Zoom as our campuses reopen and as high schools reopen. Are we invited back as admission officers to have the conversations we've always had in school? What happens to testing after what has been a pretty uniform optional period because the pandemic preempted testing as part of our processes? I don't think either of those two questions have an answer just yet, but I find them very interesting topics for my fellow admission officers to be thinking about. So that's me and some of my thoughts about what I'm witnessing. Adrian, back over to you.
Thanks, Lee. As a reminder, folks, you don't have to wait until we're finished introducing ourselves. If there are questions that arise as you're hearing from each of us in our introductions, would love to begin queuing those up for the other side of intros. Lee has planted a few questions already that are certainly pressing in my universe too, and I'm delighted to hear a little bit more from Newman Selvitelli, Trinity class of 1991. So thank you for being here and participating as part of your reunion year, and currently serves as the Director of College Counseling and Leadership at Suffield Academy.
Great. Thank you so much, Adrian. I really appreciate it. It is a great honor to join this panel. And yes, a definite special shout out to my fellow 1991 classmates celebrating our 30th reunion. As Adrian said, my name is Ann Selvitelli. I'm the Director of College Counseling and Leadership at Suffield Academy, which is in Connecticut. I actually just completed my 17th year at Suffield. So like Lee, I'm seeing the years stack up very quickly. And I feel like I was just yesterday that he and I were stuffing envelopes in the alumni office, although I guess I was stuffing the envelopes. He was probably telling me what to do. But it's great to be with him again today. For those of you who don't know Suffield Academy is a highly selective independent school with both a boarding and a day population of about 415 students, so pretty small. We have a very traditional college prep program with a unique leadership program and an overall emphasis on nurturing and challenging students in a warm and structured environment, which for me is a great fit personally and professionally. I'm also the parent of three Suffield students, one who graduated last year in our virtual graduation, one who will be a senior this year, and one who is going to be a 9th grader. So I'm very much seeing the college process through many different lenses. Obviously, first and foremost, in most of my life as an independent school administrator and college counselor, but now also from the parent perspective as well. I've worked in independent school administration since my Trinity graduation, except for a 4-year stint at Babson College's undergraduate admission office, which I loved that work. I actually started out at Loomis Chaffee in admissions, got my graduate degree in counseling, went to Dana Hall outside of Boston, where I was dean of students. And then I really missed the positivity of admissions work, and that's when I transitioned to Babson. And coming home to Suffield Academy, because I grew up in Suffield, Connecticut. So I always say it's kind of the perfect confluence of my personal and professional life to join the faculty there. It's a place that allows me to follow my passion of individualizing attention for each student. And I find great joy in helping students actualize their strengths and talents and find several college matches that, helping them really realize it's not a prize to be won, but a journey to be taken. Not my words, I'm quoting somebody else, obviously, but that's kind of the working philosophy that I have in my mind every day. In a world where we can really fall prey to measuring outcomes, I think it's really important to keep emphasizing the journey and the distance traveled. That's a huge mantra at Suffield, and one we repeat almost every day. We work with a huge range of students as well, from all different kinds of backgrounds. Generally, to be honest, very privileged population being in an independent school, but we do have students from all around the world, from many different socioeconomic backgrounds, and they're looking at a huge range of colleges, which is one of the most fun parts of the job for me. At Suffield, I've developed a 4-year college counseling program trying to take the stress out of the process and introduce students to college admissions incrementally and at developmentally appropriate times in their high school career. This pairs really well with my work running the leadership department, which includes a curriculum which focuses on personal mastery, communication skills, servant leadership, and preparing for the future, which obviously includes a college search for all of my students. I really credit my energy and enthusiasm for this work to my Trinity experience. At Trinity, I worked in the admission office. I was a senior interviewer, and I was very involved with the residential life program for 3 years, sophomore, junior, senior, running it my senior year. So I am so happy to be here today and share what I can with the Trinity community, which has given me so much. I think Lee did a great job, and Adrian, sort of touching upon the different trends that we're seeing. I've seen a lot of changes from the student perspective. One of the things we were chatting about just before the program started is how different the experience, the college search process is for parents going through the process right now, in terms of that it's incredibly different from when they went through their own process. For me, my parents were kind of like, here's 5 NESCAC schools that we think would be great and 1 Reach school. And I didn't really have a lot to say or do about it. And now there's so much more good emphasis on process and match and fit, but there's also huge challenges in terms of selectivity and cost. But students are looking further and broader in their searches as well. So it's a roller coaster, and I love the ride, and I'm thrilled to be here today. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. We're beginning to see some questions come in through the Q&A, so no need to wait to get those in there, organizing them as folks are making introduction. And so pleased to offer the floor to Zee Santiago, Trinity class of 2009. Zee serves as the College and Career Planning Manager at the Office of Post-Secondary Readiness through the New York Department of Education. So Zee, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Hi, everyone. My name is Zee Santiago. I am a College and Career Planning Manager with the Office of Post-Secondary Readiness at the New York City Department of Education. I have the privilege of working under the Chancellor and the Mayor's Office at DOE Central, working with K through 16 school leaders, principals, counselors to share best practices and provide professional development for the college counseling community throughout New York City. For those that don't know, New York City is the largest school district in the country. We serve 1.1 million students, K through 12. And that means we have 55,000 graduating seniors this year. And so my office, we're charged with working with school principals to help them build their college program at their individual school. We administer a grant called College Access for All, where we administer almost about $20 million throughout the city to provide college trips to provide CUNY fee waivers for students to apply to the City University of New York for free, as well as providing access to the SAT through SAT School Day, where every student can take the exam in their high school. Prior to that, I worked at my alma mater, Trinity College, in admissions. Like many of us, we started our career as admissions officers, recruiting in different regions. I had the privilege of traveling to Kentucky, St. Louis, California, and being able to recruit students and meet students in person was the hallmark of this industry. And I think it's something we miss very dearly. And so we hope that, as Lee and Adrian mentioned, I hope that we can get back to doing that and inviting admissions counselors back to our schools. After working at Trinity, for a few years, I became a director of college counseling in the South Bronx, where I work with students directly to individualize their post-secondary planning process for them, and helping them apply to different colleges, a myriad of institutions, highly selective institutions, as well as public and state universities. And so it's been an absolute pleasure to see the transitions in the college admissions landscape over the last 10 years. I'm involved in our regional and citywide associations. I'm part of the Consortium for Access to College Education, also known as CACNY, and I'm also a high school delegate for our regional association, New York State ACAC. And so it's been an absolute honor to serve my alma mater, but also really grow in this field of admissions based on my experience as a Bantam. I am a product of the landscape that is shifting that we discussed. Lee mentioned the importance of access and the balance of trying to create a dynamic and diverse class socioeconomically as well as racially. I'm a Posse scholar and had the privilege of attending Trinity with 10 of my best friends, and cost was not a concern for my family for that reason. And so it's been a real honor to pay that work forward in the students that I serve in New York City, and talking about scaling that up and developing professionals in this field in the city of New York and regionally throughout the state. And I think with all of that has happened with the pandemic and the test optional shifts and, everything going virtual, it's ever more present that an individualized college process is what students need, that's considering their sense of belonging, their social emotional needs, and really trying to find, as Ann said, their best match for them. And we're doing that at scale in New York City. And so thank you for having me today. It's been a pleasure, and I'm really honored to be here.
Thanks, Zee, and thank all of you for your wonderful introductions. We've got such a wide representation of folks who are serving students and professionals in really different spaces within this college admissions landscape. So excited for your different responses to the questions that we have coming in right now. First question, and I'm going to start with you. And what are some of your observations about the last year that don't appear in the headlines?
That's a great question. There's so many headlines about hyperselectivity and the stress that causes students and families. And I feel as though that, well, this is my little commentary on that, but I feel as though that just adds to more stress and anxiety about all of it. Some of the things that I think haven't been highlighted enough in headlines are the good stories that happen. And as Lee mentioned, the testing optional movement has had tremendous growth. Trinity's been a great leader in that area, as well as Con and Tufts, right, Lee? And maybe now I'm putting pressure on them. Okay, but there's, for me, having seen it really help open up doors for students that wouldn't have necessarily been open before in terms of their options. I think that's tremendous, and I hope we can talk about that more and really look at it and think about what that means for college admissions. That's my biggest one.
Thanks, Anne. Lee, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah. I would caution everybody that the headlines are often written to get clicks these days. And I skim them as much as anything because I just need to know what everyone's chirping about. And I often yell at my computer screen about how one-sided the story is. And I think the untold story of this past year has been for all of the ways in which our lives have been upended and how college admission has been forced to be more elastic in the way we do our work and read a file. The fundamentals didn't change. When I was reading files this winter, there were more of them, as Anne said, and the volume, I think, was a function of people being scared about what was happening and they over applied. But I think on the upside, it was also a function of when we shifted to Zoom, because we had to, we removed geography as a barrier to recruitment. And it was no longer necessary for a family or a student to find her way from home to Hartford or to Hanover to be able to take a tour. We didn't have to go to Texas to be able to recruit Texans. And that opened up a really different conversation that hadn't been there before. And I think that will continue. But fundamentally, the way I was reading this winter was the way I've read all 30 years before. Sometimes there was a test score in it. Sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes extracurriculars were a little fuzzier than they might have been. But as I said to one student who asked me what she should do because the band wasn't performing, I said, I said, what's your instrument? She said, flute. And I said, do you still play the flute? And she said, yes. And I said, so you're still a musician? And she said, yes. I said, that's what counts. The band is the forum for your musicianship. It's not making you a musician. So anyway, I think the year ended up being more normal than not. And the headlines don't talk about that.
Thanks for that. I mean, between testing, both of you mentioned testing, and Zee, you mentioned testing in your introduction. I agree with you, both Anne and Lee, that some of the shifts open doors, and a lot of the work in the day-to-day, while it shifted online, was refreshingly normal. Here, I think the hardest part was just reading the stories of the students navigating the pandemic and some of the challenges they were overcoming. We had to read a bit more of that. And so making sure our admission officers were caring for one another was definitely important. So would be curious, Zee or Anne, if there are other things to add.
Yeah, I think Lee touched on it a bit. I think a shift in our culture and our society is around the importance of mental health. And I think that has really shown itself in the application process this year. The Common App added a question regarding COVID-19 and the experience in the pandemic. And so I think the social emotional awareness of our teenagers that are applying right now is in a lot of ways is really inspiring. But I think it's showing up in the way in which applications are being read by my colleagues that are on that side of the desk, and also the way in which we're trying to prepare families and students for their post-secondary journeys that they're embarking on. And so I think that's the biggest piece that I think isn't really being talked about in the headlines that I've been able to witness. And it's been nice to see it on a personal and also a professional level throughout our regional and national associations.
Yeah, I'll just quickly echo. I absolutely so appreciate my colleagues on the other side of the desk and how the human factor with how they dealt with the volume going up and yet still made time to talk to families or to go out of their way. I mean, the hours they were logging at night, in weekends, and always being available. I think some of that is going to be hard to keep up, but it's been a tremendous silver lining in terms of communications and care. And that I really thank all of them for too.
Totally. This is a really human process, and I think that is often missed by the media. I will go in a different direction as a math person, and you've each mentioned testing. Would love to hear a little bit more from each of you about testing and its role in the test optional movement and its influence on your work with professional teams, with school communities, with the students themselves, especially in the context of this is a really human process.
So testing, it is, for my career, testing has been the topic that everyone puts outsized weight on the idea that it's the most important thing. And for every year up through this last one, I would say it is one factor among many on the academic side of your file, and the transcript being most important, and the testing when it's required is a supporting element of that. And I worked at College for a long time with an optional test policy, and in that space, it was always frustrating to have families say, "But is it really optional?" And I started saying, yes, optional is not another way of spelling required. Like if it's optional, it is saying to you, you have permission to include or not a score if you think it helps us meet you as a student and answer the most fundamental question any admission officer has to answer. Are you prepared for the curriculum that's offered at the school where you've applied? And in some places, testing is useful for that. And I've worked at Tufts and now Dartmouth, which have engineering schools, and the faculty in those spaces have said the math scores are instructive in combination with curriculum and the grades in that curriculum. It doesn't mean there's a line that everybody has to cross, but I think the part of testing when it's part of a file that is often misunderstood is the idea that it's contextual, that we look at a score, and the high school often share local means and ranges. And while a place like Dartmouth might have an SAT mean that is quite high, a high school applicant might be in an environment where the norm is 1,000 and somebody has a 1250, and that's a remarkable score in context, even though it's lower than the mean in the environment where I work. So that, I think that's always been true. And I think I mentioned the unanswered question. I think the optional testing that took root literally a year ago, and in my office will extend into a second year because testing is still not universally available, begs the question, well, what comes next? I keep quoting that Hamilton song, what comes next? Because as the pandemic ends and testing reopens, have we learned something over the last year or two that allows us to stay permanently optional? I think Anne was campaigning for that a few minutes ago, and maybe Zee will be too. And but I think there are some places that will reinstate a required test. I think there will be others that discover this pause, which is what Dartmouth implemented, a pause, not a change, because we just said we can't require what's not possible. But I will say, as a reader, it's helpful when it's there. It's possible to read a file thoroughly when it's not. And I think that balance is more likely than not to be the new normal.
Yeah, sorry about that, Lake.
No, that's okay, Anne. Because
it just makes my life easier, and I admit to being a little selfish about that, both as a parent and as a counselor. Unfortunately, our kids are growing up in such a test-driven environment, and so that move away from that pressure is nice. It used to be my first interaction with students was saying, okay, you need to sit for this PSAT and the pre-ACT, and it's not all about testing, but it's the first thing you actually meet with the college counselor about. And so I've been trying to flip that around and not have it be the first conversation we have with families. And it has been nice in the past year to take a little pressure off of that. People keep asking, what if look into your crystal ball and what do you think is going to happen? And I really appreciate what Lee is saying, and we're not sure, because I can see that from this side too. What I like that I hope we can keep is the flexibility. And, for instance, I do have some kids who are phenomenal testers, and yes, that's a strength they bring to the table. I also have like one student this year who's like incredibly anxious about testing, and his family decided early on, he's not going to do it. We're not going to do the standardized testing. And I'm like, great. There's plenty of schools to choose from. So I think being able to have options of all different shapes, sizes, and locations for a family for a student who wants to go testing optional makes all kinds of sense. But I certainly appreciate and understand that there may be a place for it as well. But we're gonna see. I think it's really smart that the colleges are taking more than 1 year. Many have said 2 or 3. because we have to see how it plays out.
I agree. I think from an equity lens, it's really important to consider all of the different factors when you're thinking about disparity in access to testing, in terms of students being able to have, the ability to uh, do test prep, right? As an example. So I think the added emphasis on academic rigor, and as Lee mentioned, talking about the importance of a school profile when reading a student's file. In New York City, we've really tried to provide a lot of access to the testing. And so a big mayoral initiative has been AP for All, trying to offer AP classes at a scaled rate throughout the city. And also, as I mentioned, SAT School Day, where we provide the exam for our students in the school building. And so throughout the pandemic, we actually continued that tradition. And so students were actually coming in for the first time as juniors in 15 months to their school buildings to sit for the exam if they wanted that as an option. And so I think it's opening doors for students from a access perspective. The City University of New York has 26 different colleges, half of them being two-year institutions. A number of students who would have not been admissible in prior years to accessing a four-year education has really shifted for our students. And so it's been really great to see, and students that don't necessarily test well, being able to still highlight their strengths and be able to access different institutions of selectivity has been opening many doors for students. And so I'm hoping that that as an industry and as a profession, we actually don't revert back to it being required at most schools, and so that we can begin to de-emphasize the importance of testing. And as Lee mentioned, I think the importance of academic rigor, and I think the importance of extracurricular activities and students really taking the opportunity to show their whole self and throughout the application through their writing and letters of recommendation can continue to shift the industry and shift the profession to really adopting a holistic review process that I think was oftentimes mostly part of a more selective body of institutions prior. And so it's really great to see large state universities, large city universities like the ones in New York becoming more holistic because of this shift in the test optional space.
Thanks all for your insights. I think the message really is that testing has been maybe one component of a much larger picture as we're evaluating students and building communities. So regardless of its future, which I hope is more optional for students across the board. We've been test optional here at Trinity since 2015, and over 80% of our students now are applying without test scores. So very possible to build a robust and dynamic academic community without standardized test scores. But even if folks are continuing to require them in some places and spaces, it's still very much one small piece to a much larger whole. Zee, you mentioned equity as you began talking about testing in your responses, and I'd be interested in starting with you, and then certainly Anne and Lee, feel free to chime in. But like, what patterns or processes, if any, have you seen shifting in students who your schools are serving within the pandemic? Certainly, but just overall, especially since you worked at Trinity and were a college counselor and then are serving in a much broader role, just would love to hear how populations, historically underrepresented students are navigating this experience and how that differs from some of your other experiences.
That's a wonderful question. And I think it's about access to resources and knowledge, right? And so I think what we're trying to do is scale the profession and really educating school leaders and school counselors on the importance of the college application process. There's a huge discrepancy and disparity nationally around the role of a guidance counselor. A guidance counselor is overwhelmed. The ratios are in a lot of ways inhumane, right? Having a caseload of over 200 students that you have to attend to socially, emotionally, as well as, oh wait, I have to actually help them navigate the college application process. Providing individualized attention to students is something that our field is still not grappled with in terms of students who are coming from different backgrounds and different socioeconomic statuses, and really just the resources of their high school. And so working for the largest school district in the country, I think the mayor, Bill de Blasio, and Chancellor Meet Ross Porter have done a really wonderful job of trying to utilize the city's resources to help students better navigate their college application process by providing overtime to school counselors to actually work with students after hours, to providing resources for college trips pre to the pandemic. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the work that's happening on the high school level in terms of providing professional support to helping students find a sense of belonging, right? Find an academic fit in terms of their, and mention the importance of match. But what colleges are doing across the nation to really put diversity, equity initiatives at the forefront of what they are providing within their school communities, not just having a Office of Multicultural Affairs, but really integrating equity in the way in which pedagogy has been included in the classroom, to campus events and so forth. And so I think that's a huge shift that I've been able to see in the industry over the last few years. And when you talk about equity and the importance of providing a school community that's accepting, it's been an honor to be a Trinity alum, but also work for my alma mater and see that shift over these last number of years. And be, in a lot of ways, as a student of color at Trinity, be a product of the work that y'all are doing on that side of the desk in terms of recruiting students from diverse backgrounds, socioeconomically as well as culturally, and being part of that community. I felt not only accepted, but I felt supported, and was, in a lot of ways, my life was changed by the work that admissions officers have done. Shout out to Anthony Berry, who still works in the Trinity admissions office. He interviewed me as an impressionable 17-year-old when he visited me at my high school. And that experience, I think, is what we're trying from my perspective now at the City Department of Education, trying to replicate that experience at scale for students, where they can feel that colleges are a place that are going to be accepting and supportive of them, socio-emotionally as well as academically.
I thought, yeah, I would love to just jump in on that. I think there's been some really important work this year and conversations in the counseling profession about how to work with a range of students, how to, I mean, I think we've always been focused on that, but how can we best represent students? How can we leverage things like recommendations, talking about character, how they're involved with their families, how they've managed their time, all different kinds of perspectives, but also how to get students to think about a range of schools, how to look at schools that maybe they wouldn't have thought of before, but really just empowering every individual to feel like college is an option, and that there's a place for them out there. I think that's really critical. And those conversations have been stronger and more forward moving, which has been great.
We haven't really mentioned financial aid. And I think that is the essential piece of this as well. And, I mentioned I was first gen when I came to Trinity. I could not have come to Trinity without a full financial aid award, and the student loans and the working at Saga on Sunday nights. And, but financial aid, I've often said financial aid was the mortgage I took on my future. The college gave me a scholarship. I had to borrow as part of that. But I think as we talk about access and equity and a reimagination of our community, the reality is also for many families, scholarship is the non-negotiable part of the ability for us to not just open the door, but have them come through the door. And so, what I'm seeing everywhere I've worked, and certainly now, just this priority on both recruiting students from low income and middle income backgrounds and convincing parents that it is affordable. Maybe Zee sees this in the New York City public schools. That's the hardest part of it, is that, people look at the price tag. I went back and looked at what did my senior year at Trinity cost, and it was like $12,000 or $13,000. A year at a private college now is in the high 70,000 range. And that just is a conversation stopper for a lot of families. And I'm sure Anne hears this too, when people start to explore and they say, I just can't afford it. So, Trinity and all of our peer schools have to keep investing in the endowment that creates the scholarship opportunities that allow these classes to be as broadly diverse as they have become, without putting a burden back on the student to have to pay back significant debt. And that's the ongoing challenge of higher education right now. And for all of us in admission, I mean, the number of places that remain need blind shrinks year by year. And I feel so privileged to work at one that can meet full need and be need blind. But I watch the zeros add up every spring and I say, wow. And I just think I share that because it's a reality. It is the place where on the institutional side, some colleges just can't do what we want to do. And others have to really dig into their resources to keep this conversation alive.
Thanks so much for bringing up the aid piece and the interest sort of across colleges and providing more access and opportunity for folks new to admissions lingo and jargon. Being need blind is being able to make admissions decisions or making admissions decisions without knowledge of financial circumstances. There are very few, as Lee mentioned, institutions who are need blind. Many institutions, Trinity included, are incredibly need aware in the process. So at the end of the process, financial circumstances can influence our admissions decisions. Even knowing that Trinity, compared to the NESCAC over the last 5 years, has increased its financial aid budget the fastest out of anyone. So we've seen huge transformation in financial aid and still have many hundreds of students who are amazing students who we can't say yes to given that constraint. Since y'all each mentioned this sort of individualized experience and trying harder to get students the individualized support they need, plus Leah's recent mention of colleges becoming more interested and aware of different populations and actively seeking them, question has come in. So given this increased efforts in creating more diverse and inclusive communities, do you think that colleges, particularly more selective colleges, are competing for the same students who represent these different voices?
I think the pipeline is critical. And it's why a role like Zee's is really critical, because the part of the journey from particularly urban public schools and rural public schools is it's compromised by a lack of information. Students, their parents, even their counselors just don't have access to the kind of information that Anne is a font of information, and the students at her school benefit from that perspective that her independent school is able to offer. That's not universally true. And so I think there's danger in the question you asked, Adrian, that a lot of us, do congregate in the same communities to recruit high achieving students from the broad collection of underrepresented backgrounds. I think the opportunity and the challenge is, how do you expand that? How do you find new communities, new students in those communities? Identifying talent is the cornerstone of recruitment, and it's harder and harder to do that in some ways, but it's also weirdly easier given the digital world we now live in. Let me pause there and see if Anne or Zee, they're right in it. So what are you seeing from the pipeline?
I'm guessing Zee might have more to say, and I want to give him space and time to do that. But what I can say is that I think I work in one of those historically narrow pipelines that get tapped all the time. So if you are only looking for talented, diverse applicants at independent schools or in towns where there's a lot of resources, yes, you may find limitations on how many students there are. But exactly what Lee said in terms of expanding the pool and going to areas, I mean, there will be times I'll ask a college, pre-COVID, I guess, if they would come visit, and they would say, you know, we're really not prioritizing visiting independent schools or schools in Connecticut, or, you know, because we have plenty of your applicants, and they're right, and that's fair. And so they should spend their time going to undiscovered talent pockets. So I think it's a great thing to talk about.
I agree. And I think, candidly speaking, it requires admissions professionals like yourselves to really have these candid conversations and talk about ways in which collaboration can happen, whether that's with CBOs, community-based organizations, in regionally specific ways, or it is collaboration amongst colleagues through our associations. So whether that's NEACAC or it's New York City CAC, or doing work with PACAC in Pennsylvania, getting rural students from there, right? So I think that's an important way for us to continue to educate ourselves on ways in which we can recruit more diverse students. And but also, very candidly speaking, I think it's been an absolute honor and very eye-opening to be a part of this college access and community and professional space. But I'm really proud to be a product of it. If it wasn't for my community-based organization, Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, also known as SEO, I wouldn't have been able to attend Trinity. I may not have had the chance to meet an Anthony Berry at my, when he came to do my admissions tour and actually meet with me and sit with me one-on-one, and I got to interview. And so I think, frankly, when you talk about the state of college admissions, Lee mentioned the importance of, and Adrian mentioned, need aware versus need blind. Being a Trinity alum and an admissions officer who became a director of college counseling, I think it's baffling when you see some of the financial aid packages from some institutions throughout the country. And so one thing I'm very proud of as an alum and directly to our alumni office is the work that you guys do as development changes lives, very literally. And I think that to continue to work towards increasing our endowment and providing those opportunities for students. But I'm really proud to say that I worked at an institution like Trinity that met full demonstrated need. That is such a privilege, and it is just a testament to the way in which our landscape is shifting in admissions nationwide.
Yeah, I think we're all trying to figure out how to reach more and different students, and we're certainly doing that from Hartford, and also thinking about the institutions we're collaborating with when we're doing programs so that we can draw students who might be interested in a regional university because that's what they know and are familiar with in a particular area, or in an HBCU, historically Black college and university, or Hispanic serving institutions, so that we're exposing all of the students who are coming to programs to really different, but also really great opportunities to pursue higher education. We are down to the last few minutes, so I'm going to ask a small, hopefully short question to Anne and Zee about Trinity, and then we'll end with a bigger question. So first, Anne and Zee, from your seats, can you talk about Trinity's reputation among current high school students?
Zee, do you want me to go, or would you like to go first? Okay. I think Zee just said some great things about Trinity and his perspective, and that makes me really happy to hear that that's been his experience, and I share that. I think Trinity's reputation is really stellar. It's very strong. I think that it's being recognized for being having moved away from some of the stereotyping, Camp Trin that was really a big part of my experience in the late 80s, early 90s. And I'm thrilled to see that. I don't think it was, well, I won't go, but I had a great experience, and I love Trinity so much. So it's great to see that. I think my experience has been that students are much more interested in urban settings, and Trinity's always been the forefront of sort of saying we are the only liberal arts institution in a city, and is very proud of that identity. And I think that is working really well with students. But I think we are definitely seeing Trinity reach a broader type of students. And it's not just a pipeline for kids in New England or big international population, a lot of really great things happening. So I think his reputation has been strong. And I know that's not easy to manage, Adrian, when you've got, athletic teams to keep strong and alumni interests to be happy and, so many great opportunities, but I can't say enough good things.
And I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think being an urban institution is what attracted me to Trinity. Being a New York City public school graduate, my sister went to Wesleyan, and my cousin went to Union. And so I knew a small liberal arts college was what I wanted. And I got to Trinity and I saw Hartford and I saw the Boys and Girls Club. And it really made me excited about attending an institution where I can do community service. I had the privilege of working at the Boys and Girls Club as a camp counselor. I say that being an admissions counselor was my first job out of undergrad, but I was really a camp counselor for about 6 months. And so the work that the institution has done to support the community of Hartford is awesome. Whether that's like collaborating with Hartford Youth Scholars or all the work that the students are doing on a daily basis. Shout out to Joe Barber in the community service office. We love you, Joe. And so I think the reputation of Trinity precedes itself. The huge step that it took to go test optional was a wonderful one. And I think I've been a really proud Trinity alum, especially when working with diverse populations of students and basically as a college counselor having to sell them on this dream of college and why you should go to college and go to a place like Trinity is transformational. And I think within our profession and within higher education, Trinity's reputation precedes itself. And Lee, I don't know if you know this, but I actually got the privilege of meeting Lee at a conference, and at the time he was the dean of Tufts, and I just remember being so in awe. I was a huge fan of Lee at that moment, but I was just like, oh my gosh, I just wait one day where we can like be in the conversation with a school like Tufts or a school like another NESCACs. And so I think it's been real honor to watch Trinity grow over these last number of years in this past decade after being out of undergrad. And so I think the students that we recruit and the students that we attract to our community as Bantams can only get better, and by the work that Adrian's doing in her office. And so it's been a real pleasure to see Trinity from afar over the last few years.
I'm just gonna add one 30-second thank you. That was so flattering, Zeke. But Joanne Berger Sweeney was my boss at Tufts. So that, there's all these like cross currents. And when she was interviewing for the presidency, she said, what advice would you give me? And I said, own the city. And I said, when I was at Trinity, I was always puzzled why everyone compared it to Williams. And there's a lot of common ground with Williams, but they're very different experiences. And I said, she adopted a sentence I gave her, which was, Trinity is liberal arts with an urban pulse. And I said, you can't escape that. So speak to that and you will attract students who want that.
Thank you all. And I mean, for our alums here, the pride in Trinity you're seeing here, the pride and the connection you have to Trinity, the louder and more broadly you are sharing it, the more that helps in our work in inviting new students to Trinity. So harness the energy of these folks, and that'll certainly help maintain Trinity's strong reputation and inspire future Bantams. As we wrap up today, I would love to hear from each of you what your hope for the future of college admissions is. And Lee, we're going to start with you.
Wow, crystal ball. Sorry, that was my dog. Maybe
dogs have something to say, so we'll give them a moment. Anne, what are you hopeful for?
I love this question. I think my hope is that we can keep lowering the flame, that in so many different ways, and mostly in terms of the hyperselectivity and people's focus on how do I get in, to really embracing the fact that you're going to college and this is an incredible opportunity and there are places for everybody. And it doesn't need to be a competition. It's an incredible opportunity. That's my main hope.
My dog has stopped screaming. um, I was going to say something similar before Logan started barking. My counterintuitive hope for the future of college admissions is that the volume recedes. I think we are in an unhealthy zone of over applying, which triggers microscopic selectivity, particularly in the end of the college spectrum where I work. And unfortunately, that's also where the media puts its spotlight. And I will confess that, so our Dartmouth's admit rate this year was 6%, and I hated it. It was a really unpleasant. I mean, the class is fantastic, but the process that produced that class, I don't think was healthy for admission officers, and it certainly wasn't healthy for students. And so my hope is that at some point soon, there's some course correction around volume that allows students to apply to a few. I mean, Anne mentioned she applied to a few. I applied to 5 places, and that seems so quaint in retrospect. So that would be my hope. I don't know how we get back to that, but as I look at the last few years of my career, that is something I'm starting to Anne's campaigning for no testing. I'm starting to campaign for less volume.
We're on the same team.
Right.
In terms of the future of college admissions, I am really excited about just the opportunity to expand opportunities for more students. I think sharing resources and understanding the college process has been a kind of life charge for me thus far in my career, and it's something that I want to continue to do. And so I hope that in the admissions landscape over the next few years, we can achieve some more equity in terms of access to college for students, but also into what Lee mentioned in terms of the way in which application pools are being produced and having to be read. And so I think it's a changing landscape, but with the advent of this blended virtual world that we're living in, I think we can continue to do that work. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing the way in which admissions changes over the next decade.
Thank you all so much for your insights and time today. This really is the soul's work as we support students through this experience and then through their college experiences and what they do afterwards. So I really appreciate your time, Lee, Zee, and especially in your reunion year when there are many festivities you should be partaking in. So thank you all. Thank you to the folks who joined us. It was a pleasure to answer your questions, and I look forward to seeing you all in Hartford soon.